I find myself, I don't know if it's because I'm getting old, they usually tell me that's one of the signs, that I think to myself. Lots of times I find myself thinking to myself. And not even thinking to myself, but having a fat discussion. And answering all my questions. And one of the thoughts that's really been coming to my mind a lot is how long still? How long until D-Day? How long until the final hour? How long until time is no more? I've said this to you before, but as a young minister, I was attending a meeting where a minister was standing up and he was talking about Revelation, and I noticed just across the aisle from me was this old man, a minister, and I realized that he's been around the block. And I looked over at him and I was confident at that time that I would never get as old as what he is. That Jesus would come before that time. And I found myself seeing somebody looking across the aisle at me, a young person, considering that they would never get to my young age. Sometimes when I walk past the mirror, I actually get a shock. I don't recognize the other person. How long still? And yet somehow in part of that question we also hope long, because we do not like the idea of what is waiting ahead. It's scary. We are told that we're going to be thrown into prison. We are told that we are going to be persecuted. They're going to pull the fingernails out of our hands. They are going to stretch us apart. They're going to throw us to the lions. They are going to do the most unimaginable things that eye has not seen, but yet will come up in the mind of the man as to what they would want to do with us. Now, when I considered the life of Christ, the worst death you could die was that of a crucifixion. You suffocated to death. That's basically what happened to you. You died of lack of oxygen. I'm wondering what torture the devil has in store for us. And while I let you think about that, you should be nervous. Because the purpose of the torture is to break you. The purpose of the torture is to get you to change your mind. When I think of Peter, he was just standing in a courtyard and his friends were just kind of like, hey, aren't you one of these people? I mean, nobody threatened him with a knife or a gun or throw you in prison. None of that. And yet, just because he was fearful of what the people could do, he denied Christ. Now notice what I just said. He was scared of what he imagined the people would do to him when they found out he was one of the disciples. And I think sometimes that fear, it's like the fear of a spider or the fear of a snake or fear of close environments, the fear of lifts, all of those things. Sometimes it's a matter of brain been scared. And I just wonder, what will I imagine people doing to me because I'm a child of God? And that's scary. Just as beautiful as what mankind can be, as demonic mankind can also be. So I want you to go back to this verse. Now it's interesting that this part of this message is to the church of Philadelphia. Now, there was a song written about Philadelphia. It's supposed to mean the city of love or brotherly love. And God wrote to Philadelphia. Now, if I look at the time span of these different periods of time, this time span would have been that period of time when it was the darkest period ever on planet Earth. Did you hear me? It would be in that period of the 1,260 years of persecution, where anybody who claimed to be Protestant was treated very harshly for that. Now you'll notice I also chose my words carefully there. If you claim to be Protestant, now if I had to ask you, what is the religion of the Protestant, I'll be interested to know your answer. It's very clear that the religion of the Protestant is the Bible, and the Bible only is where we gain our guidelines as to what we do as Protestants. So, these people that I'm going to be talking about, Christ tells them in verse 10, we're right back there again, since you have kept my command to endure patiently. Now there's two words there that just popped out into my mind. Being a person who's living in the period of Laodicea. Okay, that's the next church. That's actually the last church. And the beginning of that last period of time started round about 1844. I can show you that there were signs in the air that was the door. One door was closing. Well, not really closing, but the emphasis of that period of time was coming to an end, and a new dispensation of time was breaking open. So these people find themselves just before we find ourselves. Now you might say, but that's a long time. Well, I want you to understand that the dispensation time of the Philadelphians was 1,260 years. Okay, now since 1844, we haven't been going that long yet. So we've moved into the final dispensation of time, but the interesting thing about the final dispensation of time, there is no time given. Whereas for the dispensation of the Philadelphian, and you'll soon pick up why I'm bringing this all, there was a time block. There was a time when it started, and there was a time when it ended. And when did it end, as we who claim to know the ending of it? When did it end? In 1798. The period of the Philadelphians came to an end. But the result of what happened in that time period, we don't even measure it, but it's guesstimated that approximately 300 million Protestants gave up their lives for, as the word says, keeping the commandments of God and the testimony. 300 million people. died for that. Now, when I look at that, I'm trying to show you there should be this period of time. We are also counseled was a period of time that was bound in time, that period of time ended in 1798. So we have moved out of that period. We are no longer in that persecution period of time. We're out of it. But I want you to notice the key word when I read this, since you have kept my command. Now, if you go to Revelation chapter 14, it says, here are they that what? Keep the commandments of God. And then it says, and hold to what? To the testimony. So although that period of time which was persecution for people who kept the commandments and had the testimony of Jesus Christ, although that period seemed to have ended, the people did not end. Did you understand? That period ended, but the people carried on. And hopefully we are those people that are keeping the commandments of God and holding to the testimony of Jesus Christ. And the interesting thing is that when you look at Revelation 14, where it talks about here or that keep the commandments of God, it talks about the patience of the saints, referring to them as saints. And when you read here, since you have kept my command and endured patiently. Now listen to the word, endured patiently. How many of us are enduring patiently with what's happening to you? I find myself many times like the people in the wilderness, that I'm impatient. And impatience is a sign that I'm not enduring. And there's lots I can talk about patience or how you can actually gain patience. You know, sometimes people say, well, the way that the Lord tests you with patience is He puts you where you have to practice patience. No, that's not true. All that will do, if you as an impatient person is placed where there is a situation that calls for impatience, you will just continue to be impatient. You're not going to all of a sudden become patient. It doesn't work like that. There's a certain way that you gain patience. And it's not by trial. But it is by enduring. But in order to endure, you need a certain amount of insight. You need to know that this pain is going to come to an end because that helps you to endure it. So many times we will talk about a loved one who is going through incredible pain as they close the years of their life off, and then all of a sudden we will say, that person can rest now from their pain. It's almost like death came as the chance just to stop pain. I mean, that's why I believe a lot of people want to die. Because if you really want to live, you have to have a reason to live. And in order to have a reason to live, you must be excited about living. Can't wait to get up in the morning and go around. But if you wake up and you can't, I've got to do this, you almost wish you were dead. Some people even say to me, I woke up. Because what do you find when you're sleeping? Nothing. You dream, maybe a nightmare or even a daydream or whatever. You have a dream. It's nice. You have dreams. But it's when you wake up and you find out it wasn't a dream. All of a sudden you were perhaps dreaming you were flying and you wake up and you find you weren't flying. Okay, that you can handle, but imagine if you jump off a cliff. I'm just trying to, when reality comes back to you. Sometimes dream is like that period when you just can't sleep. But I'm learning something. He then goes on and says, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come. How do you like that for positiveness? It's not maybe going to come. That is going to come. But the good news to the Philadelphians was that God said to them, that hour of trial that is coming, I'm going to prevent you from having that. Okay, now I'm going to ask you this. Which side of the line do you want to be? On the side of the Philadelphians or on the side of the Laodiceans when you hear that? Well, naturally we cry out, we'd rather like the Philadelphians. But the bad news about the Philadelphians is they did die. Horrible deaths. But now I'm going to make it even more scary. That period of time is recorded as a time period that was bound in that time. It could only happen in that time. So listen to what I'm saying. What happened to those people in the time of the Dark Ages is not, there isn't going to be another time like that. That time was prophesied by God for the very purpose of trial. You'll see where I'm taking it. So according to prophecy, that ended in 1798, and out of 1798, we as Protestants could now operate without being persecuted. So we moved into period. But what is a Protestant? A person who keeps the commandments of God and holds to the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's a Protestant. A person who studies the Word of God. And when I talk commandments, I'm not talking just 10 commandments. I'm talking about every word that comes out of the mouth of God. We are His commandments. As Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And He's not restricting you to the 10 commandments. He's telling you, please feed the hungry. Please help those who are naked, clothe them, etc. He's teaching us that. But we've moved out of there. Now we're moving into time period. And one of the things that's scary about this time period that we now move into, which is Laodicea, there is no threat of life. Did you hear me? Are you being persecuted because you keep the Sabbath? Did somebody hold a gun at your head and say, if you go to church today, I'm going to shoot you? You see, that's the difference. In the time of the Protestant, in the time when they were standing, they were killed for their faith. In actual fact, their possessions were taken away from them. They weren't allowed to own property or anything like that. They were treated as if they weren't there. Valueless. But you're not treated like that. Never before in the history of our church have I ever seen a prosperous church like ours. I mean, most of you sitting here have homes. Where's the persecution? Okay, but we say, oh, well, because I want to work, I don't want to work on Sabbath. I want to tell you, you don't have to work on Sabbath. Most people nowadays work only 5 days a week. Really. You don't have to work on Sabbath. Oh, but if I don't do it, somebody's going to get my job. No. So what I'm trying to say to you, we are living in a time period where you aren't threatened, and yet, what are you like they were? Commandment keeping and holding to the testimony of Jesus Christ. But now this part where it says, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world. And then it says this, to test the inhabitants of the earth. Now, the part that's really frightening there, it's not 1,260 years, but it has been announced. What is the time period? An hour. Now, take it as you want. prophetically, an hour is about 15 days, 14, 15 days, prophetically. But what do we know about the hour according to this? It's coming. It's not coming in the time of the Philadelphians, it's coming in the time of which? The Laodiceans. Now, you are the Laodicean church. What are you waiting for? The hour. When's the hour coming? Nobody knows the hour. You see, it's interesting that Jesus is going to come in the clouds of heaven and nobody will know the hour. But I want to tell you, there is an hour. And that hour is finally going to come, as it says, to test the inhabitants of the earth. It didn't say to test the members of the Laodicea church. It didn't say that. It didn't say to test just the Christian. It says to test the inhabitants of the earth. Now the interesting thing again, when you study prophetic language, inhabitants of the earth sometimes doesn't specify everybody. An inhabitant of the earth, according to prophetic language, is an unbeliever. Did you hear me? So it seems like, if I study this, that there is a trial coming on planet Earth that Christian might not be experiencing. But I'm going to ask you this question. Are you a believer or an unbeliever? I didn't ask you if you're Christian or non-Christian. I asked you if you're a believer or an unbeliever. Now, you have to answer that question, because there's a certain way you become a believer, and you have to be a believer before this hour. Otherwise, this hour is going to test you. I'm trying to make something clear to you, that you are preparing for the hour. But some of you might never ever get to that hour. But you're preparing for it now. It's an hour that is going to come on your life, which is going to be, as it says there, to test. So can I change it, just to make it, first of all, practical to you, but I'm telling you it's definitely going to happen on a global scale, and I do believe we're near it. But, do you remember the story of Job? Can any of you tell me what God felt about Job? I mean, he even says it to the devil. He says to the devil, have you considered my servant Job? He is a man who what? Shuns evil and fears God. Now, who made that statement regarding him? God made the statement. So how did God get to the conclusion that Job was a man who feared God and shunned evil? How did he get to that place to be able to say of Job, that's my servant Job? He must have tested him. And in every test, Job was a man, when somebody asked him to do something that was not according to the will of God, he would shun it. As David would say in Psalm 1, he did not mix with the ungodly. He shunned it. He kept away. He did not mingle with that. He was a person who shunned evil, but he was also a person who feared God. And the fear of God is the beginning of what? That means he had good wisdom. He wasn't just scared of God. He knew certain things. And I don't want to elaborate on that. But God pronounces Job a man who fears God and shuns evil. He tells him actually twice. He tells the devil that twice. Now the first time that he tells the devil that, the devil says, oh, but does Job fear God for nothing? The reason why he serves you and why he honors you is because you protected him. But take away your protection. Now listen to what I've just said. What happens to the protection? It gets taken away. And now Job, for the first time in some sense, is exposed to his hour. And the beauty about his first part of his first experience where he loses everything he has, dear friends, everything. And the loss of the child is the worst thing that can ever happen to you. He loses his children too. And yet the word says to me in the very last verse of Job 1, in all that happened to Job, not once did he ever accuse God of wrongdoing. Man, that's a person who's already gone through the test of wondering, should I question God, should I question God, where he's concluded, no matter what happens, God is always righteous in his actions. And his words to his wife, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You see, he was not governed by circumstances anymore. He had made a decision. But little did he realize that he was being tested. Finally, when the devil could not do that by means of his possessions, by means of what he had, then he said, well, if you allow me to touch him, he will curse you to your face. Even his wife came up to him and said, man, it's about time you curse God and die. But he doesn't. So I'm going to ask you this. What prepared him for that hour? Dear friends, he wasn't tested in that hour. He was tempted in that hour. You see, the purpose of a test is to find out where you are, but the purpose of a temptation is to get you to fall. It's like me. I used to teach gymnastics. When a child learned, and he was a 5-year-old, and I would teach them, they had a certain movements that they had to do at that age, which they should be able to accomplish doing because of their age. And I would train them over and over and over, put them through the motions, getting them to do the movements. And then one day, I would put a test out. We would get a whole lot of people together, and I would put them out, and they had to go through their motions, and they would get grades. That's what they do at school. They grade you, test you. And people pass the test. But the interesting thing, from grade 1, grade 1, they go to what? Grade 2. And from grade 2, you go to grade. And from grade 3, you finally end up in grade 12. And then finally, you end up in grade university. And finally, you end up in grade living on planet Earth. And you realize you haven't really graduated yet. You see, all along there's going to be these things. But what I want you to know is this. In every occasion of test, listen to me, God will test you. He says that. In every occasion. Can I use one more example? Christ is led into the wilderness to what? The word says to be tempted by who? Not God. To be tempted by the devil. You see, what is the devil's objective? He wants you to fall. But Christ, throughout his life, had been tested over and over. And he, on several occasions, would turn to his parents and say, did you not know I should be about my Father's business? And over they would see glimpses of the fact that he's being tested. and he would stand the test. But finally the time came when God kind of said, you can test him now, devil, but I know your objective is to get him to fall, but you can test him. I prepared him. And Christ goes and he's tempted. The devil is trying to get him to change his mind, to change his thinking. But he's established, thou shalt not live on bread alone, but every word that comes out of the mouth of God. He is established. But I want you to notice something that's so interesting. Even though he's made up his mind, Jesus then talks to us and he says to the disciples on one occasion, as he was about eating the last meal, he says, I eagerly desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. In John chapter 12, he says, now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason that I came to this hour. Now listen to what I've just said to you. Jesus knew that there was an hour coming that would be the greatest test ever. The people even cried out, if you are God, come down from the cross and save yourself. His greatest challenge in that moment was to endure the hour. It was darkness in his life. And so what I'm trying to say to you, dear friends, first of all, on an individual basis, like Job, you are going to have an hour. I praise God that he works with mankind. My brother, for almost 65 years of his life, on several occasions met God and worked with God, but almost 50 years of his life, 45 years of his life, he was an atheist, did not believe in God. But one day, when his hour of trial came, the true work of God was revealed. He went through the final test and he surrendered to God. Like the thief on the cross. You know, the thief on the cross was already condemned by mankind. Justly. He had stolen, he had murdered, he was a rebel, he was already, by our accounts of measurements, beyond saving. The only thing that is remaining, you hang by your neck until you're dead. That was the verdict. But yet, on the cross of Calvary, Christ looked over to him and he heard the words, will you remember me when you get into your kingdom? Somehow the Spirit's work that was working on this man throughout his rebellious life, one day in that hour of test, he stood up. And so what I'm saying to you, when I read Philadelphia's story, I'm told that we who are living in the last are going to experience an hour. Now, you might, like me, like those that I saw, we perhaps will come to the end of our lives before Jesus comes. But you would have gone through your test. You will either be a sheep or a goat at that time. You will have gone through it. Just like Job, without him knowing it, went through, because God said he's mine. I believe that as we go into the end, there will come a time, literally, when the line will be drawn and God will say, he that is holy, let him continue to be holy, and he that is filthy, let him continue to be filthy. Because in that moment, when the line has been drawn, the hour of test is over. The hour of test is over. So what I'm trying to say to you in closing, don't wait for persecution to make up your mind. By the time you get to when persecution is actually going to be implemented, you will already be either a sheep or a goat. You're not going to become a sheep if you behave like a goat. And you're not going to become a goat if you behave like a sheep. But that hour is going to come, and it's the way in which God is going to test to see if you are ready for His kingdom.